Deep inside the thick forest, far away from towns and busy roads, lived a man known as the Woodsman. His name was Elias, but very few people used it anymore. Most villagers only spoke of him when they needed firewood or heard the echo of his axe striking old trees. Elias had chosen a life of quiet, living in a small wooden cabin that stood at the edge of a peaceful clearing. The cabin was simple, just one room for sleeping, one for cooking, and a tiny porch where he often sat in the evenings, listening to the wind move through the tall pines. Elias did not hate people, nor did he fear them. He simply felt more at home among the trees. The forest never judged him, never asked questions, and never hurried him. It welcomed him with rustling leaves, birdsong in the early morning, and soft light breaking through the branches. Every day he woke before sunrise, brewed a pot of hot tea, and stepped outside to breathe in the cold, fresh air. His days were quiet, steady, and predictable. He chopped wood for the village, hunted small animals for food, and gathered herbs and wild berries. Sometimes he met travelers passing through the forest. They would greet him politely, perhaps ask for directions, but Elias always kept his words short. He was kind but distant. Most people assumed he preferred it that way, and they were right. For many years, Elias lived alone, and loneliness became a familiar companion rather than a burden. Still, there were moments, small, silent moments, when he felt the weight of his solitude. Sometimes at night, when the fire crackled softly, and shadows danced across his cabin walls, Elias wondered what it would be like to share his home with another voice, another presence. He imagined laughter filling the empty rooms, or the sound of someone humming while cooking. But these thoughts came and went like passing clouds, drifting away before they could settle. Elias had not always been alone. Long ago he had loved deeply too. Deeply, some might say. But life had taken those he cherished, leaving him with heartbreak that pushed him into the quiet shelter of the forest. Here, he found peace, even if it came with a certain kind of sadness. The forest helped him heal, and over time he convinced himself that solitude was easier than risking more loss. Despite his quiet life, Elias kept the cabin neat and warm. He mended his own clothes, carved small wooden figures in his free time, and kept a journal where he wrote simple notes about the weather, the animals he spotted, or dreams he vaguely remembered. His handwriting was rough, but the act of writing comforted him, as if the pages could carry pieces of the thoughts he rarely spoke aloud. One cold morning, Elias noticed something he had not seen before, a set of footprints near the forest trail. They were small, much smaller than his own, and looked fresh. Children, perhaps, or a traveler with a light step. Elias studied them for a moment but decided not to follow them. It was not unusual for people to cut through the woods, and he had no reason to be curious. Still, the sight stayed in his mind longer than he expected. That afternoon, as he split a large log behind his cabin, he paused to wipe sweat from his brow. A strange feeling tugged at him, as if the forest was whispering something new, something unexpected. He shrugged it off and returned to his work, unaware that his quiet life was beginning to shift in ways he could not yet imagine. Even the trees seemed to sense a change. Birds flew in restless patterns, and the wind carried scents unfamiliar to the woodsman. Elias, however, continued with his routine, completely unaware that fate was slowly guiding someone toward him, someone who would break the silence of his world forever. At sunset, he lit a small lantern and sat on his porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and gold. He felt calm, but also strangely alert, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. The forest around him was still, holding its breath. And though Elias didn't know it yet, the life he had lived for so long quiet, empty, and solitary was about to change with the arrival of a widow and her 3 children. Their footsteps, their laughter, and their struggles would soon fill the spaces he thought would stay silent forever. While Elias continued his quiet life in the forest, Far beyond the tall pines and winding paths, a woman named Mira struggled to hold her world together. She was a widow, and life had not been kind to her since the day she lost her husband. Mira had 3 young children, Daniel, Lila, and little Tom, each too young to fully understand why their father no longer came home at sunset. They lived in a small rented room in the village, but the owner was harsh and impatient. When Mira could no longer pay the rent, she was forced to leave. With no savings left and no relatives willing to help, she packed everything she owned into one old cloth bag. She held Tom's tiny hand, asked Daniel and Lila to stay close, and walked away from the only shelter they had known. The village streets were cold that morning. People rushed past, busy with their own troubles, barely noticing the tired woman and her children. Mira tried to remain strong. She smiled at her children, told them everything would be fine, and continued searching for work or a safe place to stay, but every door she knocked on closed quickly. Some felt sorry for her, but said they could not take in another mouth to feed. Others avoided her completely. By the time the sun began to set, Mira's hope felt dangerously thin. Daniel tried to help carry the heavy bag, his little face red with effort. Lila shivered from the cold, and Tom cried softly, asking for food. Mira's heart ached with helplessness, but she kept walking, refusing to give up. She had to protect them. She had to. When she reached the edge of the forest, she stopped to rest. The trees stood tall and dark, their shadows stretching across the ground like long fingers. Most villagers avoided entering the woods after sunset, but Mira felt she had no choice. The forest, at least, offered shelter from the wind. She gathered her children close and stepped into the unknown. The path was rough, covered in dry leaves and twisting roots. The deeper they walked, the quieter the world became. Only the sound of Mira's unsteady breaths and the children's small footsteps broke the silence. Daniel asked if they were lost. Mira squeezed his hand gently and said, "No, sweetheart. We're just looking for a place to rest." But inside, she was frightened. She had heard stories of wolves, of strange noises at night, and of a man who lived deep in the woods. Some said he was dangerous. Others said he preferred everyone to stay far away. Mira didn't know what to believe. She only knew that her children needed warmth, food, and safety, even if she had to walk into the darkness to find it. They wandered for hours until the moon rose high above the treetops. Mira's legs trembled with exhaustion. She tried to stay brave, but tears blurred her vision. Tom fell asleep in her arms, and Daniel stumbled from tiredness. Just when Mira thought she could walk no further, Lila pointed ahead. "Mother, look, a light." A faint glow shimmered between the trees. Mira's heart leapt. Someone was there. Someone who might help or might not, but she had reached her limit. Gathering her strength, she followed the light, hoping desperately that kindness still existed in the world. As they drew closer, she saw a small wooden cabin. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and a lantern glowed warm on the porch. Mira stood at a distance for a moment, unsure. She had knocked on so many doors that day, and each time had been disappointed. But this was different. There was no village crowd, no hostile landlord, just a quiet home in the woods, safe from judging eyes. She stepped onto the porch, her breath shaking. Inside, Elias sat quietly, unaware of the visitors standing outside his door. He sipped warm tea and listened to the night wind. But soon, a soft, hesitant knock echoed through the cabin. Mira held her children close and whispered, "Please, let this be someone kind." She did not know that the man behind that door, lonely, reserved, and cautious, would one day become the very heart of the family she feared she was losing. And she certainly did not know that opening this door would change all their lives forever. The soft knock on the cabin door echoed again, this time a little louder, still gentle, but carrying a quiet desperation. Inside, Elias frowned. Hardly anyone ever came this deep into the forest, especially at night. He set his cup down, his instincts alert. For a moment, he simply listened. The wind rustled the branches, a distant owl called, and then silence, but something tugged at his attention. A feeling that this knock was not ordinary. Elias stood, walked slowly to the door, and placed his hand on the wooden handle. Caution had long been his companion, yet something in the night air urged him to open the door. When he finally did, he froze. In the lantern's warm glow stood a woman with tired eyes, holding a small sleeping child. Two more children clung to her sides. Their clothes were dusty, their faces pale from cold, and exhaustion weighed on every part of them. For a moment, Elias could only stare, surprised to see such fragile figures in the middle of the forest. Mira lowered her head slightly, her voice trembling. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you. We have nowhere else to go. Could we rest here for the night? Just one night. I will leave by morning." Elias felt the words hit him like a sudden storm. He had expected a hunter, a traveler, perhaps, even someone asking for directions, but a mother and children? At this hour, in this forest? Daniel, the oldest child, looked up at Elias with wide, cautious eyes. Lila held her mother's dress tightly, shivering. The little boy in Mira's arms slept against her shoulder, unaware of the fear surrounding them. Elias knew hardship when he saw it. Their weary faces reminded him of a time long buried in his memory, a time he didn't allow himself to think about. It stirred something deep within him, something he had locked away for years. But even with that ache rising in him, he hesitated. He had built his life around distance, around quiet, around keeping others out, so he wouldn't feel loss again. Taking in strangers, especially ones who clearly needed much more than a warm meal, felt like opening a door he had long ago sworn to keep shut. Mira saw his silence and quickly stepped back, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come. We'll find somewhere else." She turned as if to leave, gathering her children, but Elias reacted faster than he expected. "Wait." The single word stopped her, and the children looked up in surprise. Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. "It's cold," he said quietly, "and the forest is dangerous after dark. Come inside." Mira's eyes glossed with relief. She tried to hide. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias stepped aside, allowing them into his home. The children entered cautiously, looking around the small cabin with curiosity and fear. Mira held Tom close as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around them. Lila's shivering eased, and Daniel's shoulders lowered as he took in the safety of the room. Mira gently laid Tom on a small rug near the fire. Elias busied himself, unsure what to do next. He poured hot water, sliced bread, and set food on the table. He wasn't used to guests, certainly not children, but he moved with a quiet urgency, guided not by practice but instinct. When he placed the simple meal on the table, the children looked to their mother for permission. Mira nodded, and they began to eat slowly, gratefully. Elias watched them for a moment, feeling something shift inside him. The cabin, usually so silent, now held soft sounds, small voices, gentle chewing, a sleepy sigh from the youngest child. The room felt alive. Mira sat across from Elias, hands wrapped around the warm cup he had given her. "You've shown you as great kindness," she said softly. "We won't trouble you longer than tonight." Elias looked at her, truly looked. Her eyes carried sadness, but also strength. She had walked through the forest with 3 children simply because she refused to let them suffer. That kind of courage stirred a deep respect in him. "We'll speak of tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he said simply. She nodded, grateful but unsure what the morning would bring. As the children settled near the fire, and Mira's breathing softened into sleep, Elias sat quietly on the porch. The forest that had kept him company for years now felt different, as if holding its breath once more. He sensed, without fully understanding how, that this unexpected encounter was the beginning of something far larger than he had planned for, something that would test him, change him, and perhaps heal him. But for now, he simply watched the moon rise above the treetops, knowing that his quiet, solitary life had already begun to shift. Morning arrived gently, with pale sunlight slipping through the cracks of Elias's cabin walls. The forest outside was waking up, birds calling, branches swaying softly, but inside, the cabin felt strangely peaceful, almost warm in a way Elias had not felt for years. He stood near the doorway, watching quietly as the small family slowly stirred awake. Mira was the first to open her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, as if unsure whether she had really found a safe place the night before. But then she saw her children sleeping soundly near the fire, and relief washed over her face. Daniel stretched, Lila rubbed her eyes, and little Tom still slept with his thumb curled near his cheek. Elias had seen many things in his life, but the sight of those three resting without fear made something tighten in his chest. He cleared his throat softly. "I've made breakfast." Mira sat up quickly, embarrassed. "You didn't have to." "I know," Elias said, his voice low, "but I did." She nodded gratefully. He had cooked simple food-warm porridge, a few berries, and tea. It wasn't much, but to the children it felt like a feast. They ate with small smiles, whispering to each other. Elias noticed how polite they were, how careful not to spill anything or make noise. It made him wonder just how much hardship they had faced. Once the meal was done, Mira gathered her children and began preparing to leave. "You've been very kind," she said. "We won't stay longer than necessary." But when she stood, Tom stumbled sleepily into Elias's leg, gripping his pants for balance. Elias looked down, surprised, as the little boy blinked up at him with innocent trust. Lila tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, can't we stay a little more? Just for today?" Mira's face softened with guilt. She wanted to say yes. She wanted her children to rest, to feel safe a bit longer. But she had no right to impose on the Woodsman. Before she could speak, Elias stepped forward. "You don't have to leave yet," he said quietly. "You all need rest and food. The world outside, it's unforgiving." Mira stared at him, unsure. "We don't want to trouble you." "You're not," he replied. And those simple words opened something inside Mira, something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The day passed gently. Elias chopped wood as usual, but he found himself glancing at the cabin more than once. He could hear the children laughing softly, trying to keep their voices quiet, playing with sticks and stones near the clearing. Their laughter traveled through the trees like a warm breeze. Mira washed their clothes by the stream nearby, scrubbing carefully, her face calm but thoughtful. When Elias returned from gathering herbs, he saw her trying to fix a tear in Daniel's shirt. She worked with tired hands, yet every movement showed love. "May I help?" Elias asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh no, it's fine. I'm used to managing." Elias hesitated. "I'm good with stitching," he offered. Mira blinked in surprise. "You are?" Elias nodded once, as if it were nothing special. In truth, he had learned long ago out of necessity, but offering help felt strangely meaningful. She handed him the shirt gently, and he sat beside her, mending it with careful, steady hands. Mira watched, impressed by his patience. There was silence between them, but not uncomfortable, more like the silence of two people who didn't yet have the words for what they were beginning to understand. Later, the children returned, faces bright from exploring the forest edge. "Mr. Woodsman," Lila called. "Look what we found." She held out a handful of wildflowers. Daniel had found smooth stones, and Tom carried a crooked stick he proudly called a sword. Elias couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. The cabin, once silent and dusty, now pulsed with life. The children's energy filled the space. And strangely, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt Right. That evening, as the fire crackled softly, Mira helped Elias prepare dinner. They worked side by side without speaking much, but their movements began to harmonize as if they had cooked together many times before. When they sat down to eat, Daniel looked around the table and whispered, "It feels like a real home." Mira touched her son's cheek gently, eyes shining with sadness and gratitude. "Yes," she whispered, "it does." Elias said nothing, but those words struck deeply. A home. He had not thought of his cabin that way in a long time. After the meal, once the children slept, Mira spoke quietly. "We'll leave tomorrow. You've done more than enough." Elias looked into the fire, its light flickering across his thoughtful face. "Tomorrow is another day," he said. "We can decide then." And as the flames danced, the truth settled between them. Temporary shelter was slowly becoming something more, something fragile but growing, something that neither of them fully understood yet, but both needed more than they realized. Hope had entered the woodsman's cabin, and it was preparing to stay. Over the next few days, what began as a temporary stay started to transform into something gentler, warmer, and unexpectedly familiar. The forest cabin, once silent, once echoing only with Elias's steady footsteps, now carried new sounds. The soft chatter of children, Mira's calm voice guiding them, and the quiet hum of life settling naturally into place. Elias, who had lived alone for so long, found himself adjusting to these changes with surprising ease. Each morning, the cabin woke earlier than before. Daniel would peek out the small window, eager to help with chores. Layla loved sweeping the porch, humming softly under her breath. And little Tom, still half asleep, would wobble toward Elias with his arms raised. Expecting a lift. At first, Elias didn't know how to respond. But soon, lifting Tom became a simple, daily gesture, one that made the child giggle and warmed the woodsman's chest in ways he didn't understand. Mira noticed these small exchanges. She watched how patiently Elias taught Daniel to chop small pieces of wood, how gently he corrected Lila when she stacked logs too loosely, how naturally he carried Tom on his hip while walking toward the stream. Every action showed a softness he never spoke of but couldn't hide. And slowly, Mira began to trust him, not just as a protector, but as someone who was becoming part of their fragile world. One afternoon, the children convinced Elias to show them the deeper parts of the forest. At first, he hesitated. The woods were his sanctuary, quiet, private, untouched. But when Lila placed her small hand in his and said, "Please, Mr. Woodsman, show us the pretty places," something inside him melted. He led them along a hidden path, his steps steady, their small footsteps following closely. The forest welcomed them with sunlight filtering through leaves, the scent of pine, and the soft crunch of earth beneath their feet. Daniel ran ahead, shouting with joy when he discovered a fallen log shaped like a boat. Layla collected flowers and braided them into a crown. Tom toddled behind Elias, trying to step in his large footprints. Myra watched from behind, a smile stretching across her tired face. "They're happy," she said softly. Elias nodded. "Children should be happy." His voice was rough, but Mira heard something unspoken, something tender. She understood then that the forest had once healed him, and now it was gently healing her children too. Later, when they reached a small clearing, Elias showed them his favorite place, a quiet pond hidden behind tall reeds. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the sky. Lila gasped, Daniel knelt at the edge, and Tom clapped his hands. "This is beautiful," Mayra whispered. Elias shrugged, almost shy. "It's peaceful." The children threw stones into the pond, sending ripples across the surface. Tomes. Stone barely made a splash, but he cheered loudly, and Elias couldn't hold back a soft laugh. It was a rare sound, rusty from lack of use, but full of warmth. Mira turned toward him, surprised, and something fluttered inside her. For a moment, their eyes met, Not as strangers forced together by need, but as two people beginning to understand each other's hidden wounds. As the days passed, their routine grew comfortably predictable. Mira helped with cooking and washing. Elias repaired the cabin roof. Daniel carried water. Lily learned how to gather herbs. And Tom made every chore slower but more joyful. Every evening, they ate together around the wooden table. Sometimes they shared stories. Other times, silence filled the cabin. But it was no longer empty silence. It was the quiet of belonging. Elias found himself listening to the children's laughter, even from outside. It no longer felt like noise breaking his solitude. It felt like music he had missed without knowing. One night, after the children fell asleep, Mira stayed by the fire while Elias carved wood. "You've given us so much," she said gently. Elias shook his head. "I've only given what I can." "But why?" she asked softly. "We are strangers." Elias paused. His hands stopped carving. He looked at the sleeping children. Then at Mira. "You needed help," he said. "And the cabin doesn't feel as empty anymore." Mira's breath caught. She saw honesty in his eyes, a deep, quiet truth. They were building something fragile yet strong, born from shared need, but growing into something more meaningful. Trust, connection, a bond neither had expected. And though neither spoke it aloud, both felt the same realization settling quietly in their hearts. They were no longer just passing through each other's lives. They were slowly becoming part of them. The peaceful days in the forest felt almost like a miracle, so gentle, so warm, so unlike the life Mira and her children had endured before. But life has a way of testing the bonds it creates, and soon the Woodsman and the small family faced their first real challenge together. It began with heavy clouds gathering above the treetops. Thick, dark, and restless, Elias knew the signs well. A storm was coming, stronger than usual. He stood outside, eyes narrowed as the wind pushed against the branches. Inside the cabin, Mira was helping Lila fold clothes when she noticed Elias watching the sky. "Is it dangerous?" she asked quietly. "Could be," he answered. "This kind of storm can break trees. We should prepare." Mira nodded, trusting him without hesitation. Within minutes, they began working together. Daniel helped Elias bring in firewood. Mira checked the windows. Lila gathered blankets, and little Tom followed everyone. Confused by the sudden seriousness in the air, the wind grew stronger. The forest, once comforting, now roared like a restless sea. By evening, rain began to fall, not gently, but in fast, pounding drops. They drummed on the roof, the walls, the ground. Thunder rolled through the forest, shaking the cabin. The children huddled near Mira, their eyes wide with fear. Elias lit extra lanterns, set more logs on the fire, and sat close enough to reassure them. "It's only a storm," he said. "The cabin is strong. You're safe." Mira looked at him gratefully. His calm voice softened the fear in her children's hearts. But outside, the wind howled louder. Trees groaned. Branches cracked. The forest no longer sounded familiar. It sounded wild, unpredictable. Then, suddenly, crack! A massive branch slammed onto the roof. The cabin shook. Tom screamed. Lila covered her ears. Daniel grabbed his mother's arm. Elias rushed to the back of the cabin, checking for damage. Water dripped through a new crack in the ceiling. "Roof's hit," he said. "I have to fix it before it gets worse." Mira stepped forward. "You can't go out there, it's too dangerous." Elias shook his head. "If I don't, we'll have bigger trouble." Mira's heart pounded. She didn't want him hurt. She didn't want him alone out there. "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. Elias almost said no, but the determination in her eyes made him pause. "Fine," he agreed. "Stay close." They stepped outside together, pushing against the fierce wind. The rain soaked them instantly, chilling them to the bone. Elias climbed onto the porch roof while Mira held the ladder steady. He worked quickly, covering the crack with wooden planks and thick tar cloth. At one point, another sharp gust nearly threw him off balance. Mira gasped and grabbed the ladder tighter, fear gripping her chest. "Be careful," she shouted over the storm. Elias steadied himself and finished as fast as he could. By the time they returned inside, both were drenched and shivering, but the roof would hold. The children ran to Mira, hugging her tightly. "You're safe," she whispered, brushing wet hair from their faces. "We're all safe." Elias stoked the fire, and Mira brought dry blankets. The children warmed themselves, slowly calming down. Mira glanced at Elias's clothes soaked, his hair dripping, but his expression steady, reassuring. "You risked yourself for us," she said softly. Elias shrugged, sitting near the fire. "I wasn't about to let the roof fall on your heads." Mira looked at him for a long moment, her heart swelling with gratitude. She couldn't speak aloud. The storm lasted through the night, but the cabin remained strong. And in that long, frightening night, something important shifted. Daniel, usually quiet around Elias, sat beside him and asked questions about the forest. Elias answered patiently. Leela gave him her blanket when she noticed he was still cold. And little Tom climbed into Elias's lap without hesitation, curling against him until he fell asleep. Elias froze at first, unused to such trust, but slowly, carefully, he wrapped an arm around the boy. Mira watched the moment with tears in her eyes. Despite the danger, despite the fear, the storm had done something unexpected. It had pulled them all closer. It had shown them that they could depend on one another, that together they were stronger than they were apart. When the storm finally passed, the forest sparkled with new light. Water dripped from the leaves like diamonds. The air smelled fresh and clean. And inside the cabin, something had changed. Forever. They were no longer strangers sharing the same roof. They were becoming a family, one challenge at a time. When the storm finally ended, the forest felt reborn. Sunlight slipped through the branches as if the sky was apologizing for the chaos of the night before. The cabin smelled of warm smoke and damp clothes drying near the fire. But inside, something deeper had changed, something quiet, invisible, but powerful. Elias felt it the moment he woke. The usual emptiness of the cabin was gone. Instead, he heard soft breathing, little footsteps moving across the floor, Mira's gentle voice telling Lila to tie her hair neatly, and Daniel's laughter as he tried to teach Tom how to hop on one foot. It was as if life itself had woven into the wooden walls. After checking the roof one last time, Elias stepped back inside to find Mira preparing breakfast. Her sleeves were rolled up, sunlight catching the strands of loose hair around her face. She looked peaceful, more peaceful than he had ever seen her. "You should rest," Elias said. "You hardly slept." Mira smiled faintly. "Mothers learn to live without sleep. Besides, cooking makes me calm." The truth was more complicated. Mira felt something growing inside her, a sense of belonging she had not dared to hope for, a feeling of safety, a feeling that her children were finally somewhere they could breathe without fear. Daniel passed Elias a bowl of berries. "I helped pick these," he said proudly. "You did well," Elias replied, surprising himself at how natural the praise felt. Lila came next, holding a small wooden daisy. "Mr. Woodsman, is this pretty? I made it from the wood scraps like you showed." "And me." Elias examined the little carving. It was rough, but full of effort. "It's very pretty," he said gently. Lila beamed. Mira watched the exchange with soft eyes. She saw something in Elias, something protective, patient, gentle. Something her children responded to without hesitation. Something she herself was beginning to lean toward. That afternoon, the children played outside while Mira washed clothes by the stream. Elias chopped fallen branches, clearing the damage from the storm. But he kept glancing toward the children, his watchful eyes no longer distant. They held concern. even affection. At one point, Tom tripped over a root and burst into tears. Elias reached him first, scooping him into his arms before Myra could even stand. "You're all right," he murmured. "Just a small fall." Tom buried his face into Elias's shoulder, the crying fading quickly. Myra froze for a moment, watching the scene. Something tightened in her heart, not in fear, but in recognition. Elias wasn't just helping. He cared, truly cared. And her children trusted him completely. Later that evening, after the meal, the children played with wooden blocks while the fire warmed the room. Myra sat quietly, sewing a torn sleeve. Elias worked on carving a small wooden toy boat for Daniel. There was no tension, no awkwardness, only the calm rhythm of a family at rest, a word she had not allowed herself to imagine. Family. When the children finally fell asleep, Myra laid her sewing aside. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "You've changed our lives," she said softly. "If we had not found your cabin that night, I fear what might have happened." Elias didn't look up from the wooden boat. "Anyone would have helped." "No," Myra whispered. "Not anyone, not like this." Elias stopped carving. Myra continued, her voice trembling. "My children laugh again. They sleep without fear. They trust you. And I trust you too, Elias." Her words struck deeply. Elias felt something shift inside him, a gentle unlocking of a door he had kept closed for years. He looked at her slowly. "I didn't expect any of this," he admitted. "You came to my door, and suddenly my cabin wasn't just a place anymore. It became full." Myra's eyes warmed. "Full of what?" Elias hesitated, searching for words he hadn't used in years. "Full of life, of warmth, of people who matter." Myra's breath caught. For the first time, she saw not the quiet woodsman, not the solitary man who lived with trees and silence, but a man with a wounded heart learning to open again, a man who already cared for her children, a man who was slowly beginning to care for her. "That night," Elias said quietly, "when you knocked on my door, I didn't know it then, but you brought something into my life I didn't know I needed." Myra's eyes shone. "And what is that?" "A family," Elias whispered, almost afraid to say the word. Myra felt her heart break open with emotion. She reached out, hesitant at first, and gently placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away. He didn't tense. Instead, he let out a soft breath, as if letting go of a weight he had carried for too long. In that simple moment, quiet, warm, and filled with unspoken truth, they both realized the same thing. They were no longer strangers sharing a roof. They were becoming something deeper, something lasting, something meant to be. A family. Not by blood, not by obligation, but by choice, and by love slowly finding its way into broken hearts.